Hello, should I just start? Okay. Well, hi everyone. I'm Madeline Nonno, and I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Geena Davis Institute. We're celebrating our 20th birthday this year, and for 20 years we've been doing narrative culture change work and really focusing on who's showing up in stories and popular content like global adverts and television and film, and most recently gaming, with an eye on making sure that the content that we're all consuming in volumes and volumes reflects kind of our society, our population, which again reinforces our value as well. And so this panel is about having a discussion on how each of our illustrious panelists, which I'll introduce, are doing their part to contribute to this ecosystem. At the far end is Bill Imada, who's the Chairman and Chief Connectivity Officer for IW Group. Next to him is Dr. Rebecca Swift, Senior VP, Creative, Getty Images. And next to Dr. Swift is Komal Singh, Senior Product Manager, Google Research, AI Google, long time partner. Another long time partner is Judy Toland, VP of Global Audience Marketing for Meta. So yesterday, I presented the third update to our Global Cannes Lions study, which is actually like a benchmark study. And I'll just give you a little backstory on how it came to be, because it also was our foray into global advertising, and then hence we started working with Meta and many others. So I was invited to be the second jury president for the Glass Lions, which was just such an honor. And the Cannes Lion team thought, oh, this is kind of interesting what you do in terms of the kind of research you do. I wonder how we're doing as Cannes Lions. So they gave us 11 years worth of global Cannes Lion shortlist and winners for film and film craft. So it's a specific category. And quite honestly, my team was a little worried because we actually took money out of our Google grant to fund this study. And we thought, women and, there's so much diversity and gender and all this great stuff in commercials, we're worried we're not going to have any data. Well, so we presented the first study in 2017, and we found that male characters showed up 4 times more. They spoke 7 times more. Female characters in global advertising were 6 times as likely to be in sexually revealing clothing. Women were in the home, cooking, cleaning, in the bedroom. Male characters were outdoors, driving around. Forget about any other underserved communities like LGBTQIA or disabled communities, older adults, etc. Very terrible numbers. And yesterday was the third time that we presented it, and at least we can say we're moving in the right direction, and advertising can go with the speed of light because you're making spots all the time. And so now we have 18 years of data, and we looked at 3,100 pieces of work from 30 countries. And overall, from a gender perspective, we've seen a 10-point increase, but we're still not at gender parity. We're still at that 50%. We're not at that 50%. So my takeaway was, can we get to 50-50 by 2025? And that could be a great story we can tell next year. But when it comes to screen and speaking time, which has been provided to us by our partners at Google, and Komal will talk a little bit more about how they do that, we've seen an increase in the female character's sense of agency, because if the camera's not pointing at her and you don't see her speaking, then what are you really saying? What difference does it make if you can count that she's in a spot? But one of the most significant and positive points was that we've seen a 27-point increase in terms of people of color at 53%, which is, you have to think about, well, what does that mean? If it's the United States and people of color are 40%, that's great. If it's the UK and it's 20%, okay. But if it's Africa or Brazil, well, 53% is not really good. But it's good to see, at least with this work, that we've increased. But when it comes to LGBTQIA, under 2%. It just has never hit 5%. When it comes to the disabled community, and LGBTQIA on a global basis is 11% of our population. The disabled community is 15% of our population, not even 5%. And when it comes to older adults, we've actually exceeded the global population, which is 9%, but you don't really see them. They're not seen as being fit or active or exercising or having, a full, life experience. And then body diversity is also something we look at. And 40% of the world has a different body type. And again, dismal, percentages. So we presented that, I presented that yesterday, but that sparked Meta's interest in working with us. So Judy, I'm going to start with you. And can you talk about, obviously the work that you've done with us, but your seriousness and the impact of the intent that you've had with Meta and all of your initiatives?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for sharing some of the top level data, which is very powerful. Obviously at Meta, my grandfather used to always say, too much is given, much is expected. And we have significant share, right? 3.2 billion people interact with our apps, right? IG, Facebook, WhatsApp, our AR, VR, even our Ray-Ban Metas every day, right? Across 35 countries and 200 languages. And so that is a responsibility we have to make sure that whatever is on our platforms, that it is inclusive, right? So we have enjoyed a longstanding partnership with GDI, where we have our biannual audit, right? Where we evaluate all of the marketing that's coming out of Meta across consumer and business to creators, partners. And we've leveraged it in a myriad of different ways. But two very primary areas. One, we have within our company an inclusive marketing council, which is a diverse group of employees that look at every single piece of work that is submitted marketing wise out to our advertisers. In many cases, sometimes even customers will ask for submissions to be evaluated. And we look at it for inherent biases, things that might have perceptions that may perpetrate a bias, unintentional aspects, making sure that whatever is being put out in the world is representative of the audience that it is serving, and also the diversity of the population that leverage our platforms. And we use those audit findings to inform that council twice a year, right? And it's a regular process and information flywheel, which is important because then we can iterate. And also it gives us opportunities to see where there's hot points or flash points where I need to go and go deeper. I think secondly is that we leverage the audit findings for ongoing diversity training and engagement for our marketers, but also for our product people as well, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So it's integrated into the fabric of what we do at Meta, especially since the scale is so large.
Thank you for that. So Komal, so we've been working with Google since actually 2013. They've been a deep technology partner for us. We were awarded a Google Global Impact Award, and that led to us introducing machine learning into how we conducted our data. And for this study that I presented yesterday, Komal and her team analyzed 435 pieces of work, which was 1,000 minutes. It was 600,000 frames, and gave us additional deep findings. So, Komal, can you talk about the technology? Can you talk about the amazing insights and the depth that you were able to layer onto the study?
Yes. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to help you with this study. So I just to put things in context. So I work in Google AI research, and our teams work a lot on computer vision technologies. Also machine learning fairness. And my interest to study representation in media actually stemmed from being a mother, not so much a technologist. And something my daughter said to me when she was 6 years old, I took her to work once and she saw all people around her who were engineers, and she came back home and she said to me, "Oh, Mama, all engineers are boys," right? And that's when I started thinking about what does representation do for us grown-ups, but more importantly for our children and the youth. And of course, being a technologist, I wanted to see how is it that we can leverage technology as a tool to service us. And we started chatting with GDI, or actually GDI started chatting with us on how can we leverage AI to study representation. So we wanted to marry the field of computer vision and representation in media and see what we can do. So our team has actually, over the past few years, been building ML models, machine learning models, to infer what we call perceived attributes of characters in media. So things like perceived age, or perceived gender expression, or perceived skin tone. And then to be able to apply these models on huge media corpus actually gives us the ability to take out patterns at scale, which is not otherwise possible to do using human annotators. And we've, with GDI's partnership, done studies such as studying 12 years of representation in American television, right? So processing data that's worth thousands of hours of footage in a matter of just a few hours. And with the Cannes Lion study, again, we were able to study things at a more granular level on what is the screen time and speaking time given to characters of light skin tone versus medium skin tone versus dark skin tone. And we were able to get to insights like things like, less than 10%, I think, screen time is given to characters of dark skin tone. And even though it has risen over the past few years, it is still the group that's least likely to speak when they're on screen. So yeah, very interested to further explore how technology can be used as a tool.
And what's also interesting is we've had the privilege of working with UNICEF on global advertising studies, India, the Caribbean, Mexico. And this skin tone thing, it's always light-skinned characters. But what's interesting is male characters have a wider range of skin tone, and you'll see a higher percentage of a darker skin tone. And it's like that all over the world. So it's so interesting. So Rebecca, we were talking about the disabled community in our study, which was, even though it's 15% of the world population, it was only 1.3% of 3,100 pieces of work over 18 years. So can you talk about what Getty has been doing with Verizon and the National Disability Leadership Alliance and your disability collection?
Sure. I'm so jealous of your technology, by the way, because we do all our visual analysis manually still, and video takes forever, forever to look at. But no, I mean, we partner with a number of organisations on representation, but I think the disability collection, as we call it, which we created with Verizon and the NDLA, is something that I've been very involved in since 2019. And really, we came to that because we identified in our own content that we weren't representing disability in all its diversity, and we weren't giving our customers the, and we don't have as many as Meta, but we certainly have a good proportion of customers who, we weren't giving them the opportunity to use great images that represented disability. And so we worked with the organizations within the NDLA to make sure that we were thinking about disabilities, whether that's physical, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's invisible disability, in very, very specifically. And we've done our own analysis where we've looked at how content has been used from our collections, and the content itself has been, it's been downloaded over 200,000 times, so it's been used a lot. But we are still seeing a focus on physical disabilities. We're still seeing, even in that 1.5%, which is pretty generous actually in terms of how disability is represented across the world. We're still seeing a focus on prosthetics and wheelchairs, which are obviously incredibly visible. So the work we're doing now is thinking about, especially within this industry, neurodiversity is something we should be encouraging, we should be championing, and we've just done a great campaign around autism, using people who are activists within that community to represent and asking them to represent themselves. And the campaign was Autistic Out Loud, or Autism Out Loud, and that enabled people to kind of self-represent. And that's something as a business that we're kind of moving more towards, is having those underrepresented groups involved in the creative process and actually advising on how we create the content.
And I actually have a follow-up for you. Getty has not only looked at building diversity on camera, but you've also spent a lot of effort in trying to cultivate the communities who are producing the work. Are you trying to nurture or train the disabled community to actually be Getty photographers?
Yes, so we have different programs. We have grant programs which Verizon very generously also contribute to, and we put out general calls every year to the community to join us, and we will fund shoots for photographers and filmmakers with disabilities. Yeah. Yeah.
So Bill, this is going to be a multi-part question. You've been leading one of the most successful multicultural marketing agencies for 30 years. You've seen everything. What is the secret sauce? And what I mean is, like, I had a conversation this morning with someone who said, what does it take in order for a company to be organizationally ready, in order for them to do these things? Because it's impact over intent. So what has been your point of view on how to do it right? And what kind of training is involved? What kind of financial investment is involved? What are some of the mishaps that you've seen? Because you've seen it all.
So first of all, I'm no longer really running the company. The president of our company is Nita in the audience. So she's just giving me face. But she's the president of our organization. So she's just letting me have a little face here on stage. But first of all, in order to get companies and organizations to really embrace diversity, we have to be very intentional about it. Part of it is setting goals, but also showing the companies exactly how to do it, and seeing the value that diversity brings. So, people with disabilities, the indigenous communities, communities of color, older adults, being able to reflect that in your own organization and showing how it works often really helps. But we also want to hold our clients accountable and just say, this is what the world looks like. You need to see it. So we change the narrative a little bit. So we don't just throw statistics out. Just as an example, 20% of Asians do this, 30% of African-American Black people do this, people living with apparent and unapparent disabilities this. Instead, we reshape those narratives to make it interesting. So just one really quick example, when we were talking to one company, we were saying that the Asian American and Pacific Islander community has grown significantly. It's the fastest growing segment of the population in Canada and the US and the UK. Yeah, that's wonderful, but a lot of the companies and organizations don't see that. They go, okay, statistic in this year and out the other. But when we change the narrative and say things like, do you do multicultural marketing in a place like Belgium? And of course, people are going to say, of course, Belgium is a very diverse place. They speak Flemish, they speak French. In the area of Liège, they might speak a little bit of a Germanic Dutch. We'll say, well, if you're already doing multicultural marketing in that country, you should probably know this. There are more Chinese people and South Asians in the United States than there are people in the country of Belgium. And if you look at Asian Americans, just as an example, because we are in the States, there are more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US than there are people in Portugal, Norway, Denmark, and then we'll say something like Greece. So I do think when you change those narratives and you change storytelling to story doing and living, that's when you get people to make change.
So I have a follow-up for you. Where, we never shame and blame, but where have you seen mishaps in terms of companies that wanted to bolster, whether it's diversity in their ranks or in their content and messaging, and it just backfired on them. And because I'd love for people to have some takeaways as they're thinking about this, because different companies are in different stages of their journey.
You've already covered the panel's done a really good job. You know, we focus too much on physical disabilities, but we don't recognize that people have non-apparent disabilities. That's a huge and growing segment of the population. We also want to make sure that it's not always US centric. And so even our conversations around diversity and inclusion and belonging are different, but also colorism. So part of it is that, you know, luckily we have Getty Images providing us a lot of content that is very diverse, but we also have to push the companies as well. And we have to ask those companies, where is that diversity? We want to get away from colorism. You already said it, colorism exists all around the world, but how do we break that? And the beauty of advertising is that we can do it faster than a movie or anything else, but we have to set the example, and we need to have allies like everyone here. So the more we do that and the more we call in and work with our allies, the better we're able to convince companies that not only is this the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And even in our company, we're very diverse. We do not all agree, even if we may be the same. We're Asians or African Americans or Latinx people. We disagree regularly. But when we have these conversations, we're absolutely enriched by them, and we're able to show companies that that diversity works.
Well, it works, and it's good for business as well. And just to build just one thing, you know, a single film, an animated film, could take 5 to 10 years. So when Bill is saying about advertising, you know, you're spinning out adverts overnight or every week. Even, you know, TV can move a little quicker, but film takes forever. So that's why there's such a great opportunity with advertising. So Judy, I want to build on what Bill was saying about, you know, how do you shepherd and steward your clients? How do you deal with, you know, how much justification? How do you prevent them from having mishaps and pitfalls? And then also the platform. You've spent a lot of time to make sure that the platform is more inclusive. So can you either give some examples or, you know, what's worked for all of you?
Of course. I mean, first of all, I mean, you're spot on, especially in social media where we move at the speed of culture, at the speed of light, right? There's a lot of things that our brands, but also ourselves as Meta are putting out there that can influence and tip the tide very quickly, right? There's one of the key areas that we're very much focusing on and partnering with large brands, with agencies, with partners is around creators, or many of you may hear the term influencers, right? That are leveraging social platforms, not just Meta platforms, all platforms around the world. And we're making sure that the creators that are being leveraged are diverse, intersectional, across the diaspora of the global tapestry that leverages our platforms, and making sure that we as Meta can be a bit of a matchmaker in many ways, right? So I was just talking earlier about, we got for International Women's Month, I have the pleasure of leading our Women At group, which is our employee resource group. We represent almost 40,000 women at Meta. And we actually, for International Women's Month, got some of our largest brands and names that I won't name here, but you all know them and use them every day. And that we partnered with them to make sure that they had diverse women-led creators that could help them with their programming so they could show up as a brand, right? And because of where we are, we can do that at scale, right? And because essentially 60% of the world leverages our platform on a regular basis, we can then get that out and push it out very quickly. But, you know, getting back to the product, right? Because we have our platforms, you know, we're very much tied and very focused on making sure that our products, whether it be WhatsApp or Instagram, existing products, but also products of the future, things like AI, et cetera, are inclusive, right? Is free of bias or leading in a way that we can break down stereotypes. And we're consciously doing that on a regular basis. And we're we're doing it across myriad of different ways. Like if you've been to any of our platforms recently, Instagram, Facebook, you've noticed that there is a Meta AI prompt where you can actually use that as chat, like a chat bot. It's free. It's quite impressive. I used it because I was looking for somewhere to eat last night, and I was like, Meta AI, where should I go to eat, right? But within that power of a large language model, there's a lot of things that you need to make sure that there's not inherent biases, right? And so what we're doing is, first of all, we have what we call responsible innovation principles. The world of AI and our products right now change on a weekly basis. The speed of development is something I've never seen, and many of us have never seen. It's very exciting. But we're leveraging responsible innovation principles where we have this North Star where it's consider everyone. Consider everyone as you develop. And when we do that, if I'm a product engineer, if I'm a SWE or computer science person, who will be leveraging and interfacing with this content or this product, and how will they be using them? And when we talk about consider everyone, we were mentioning differently abled, right? When we think of things like curb cuts right now, who is the biggest beneficiary of curb cuts? Young mothers and young fathers with strollers, right? It's like the rising tide lifts all boats, right? You consider everyone, then everyone benefits in that way. But we also have a very distinct product inclusive council, right? Similar to our marketing inclusive council, where we're have our diverse employees looking at all things when it comes to what we're developing. Things like avatars, are there avatars with Black women with braids? At first, there were not, right? And there were diverse employees that said, "Hey, that's probably a miss," right? Making sure that there's diversity there. And then also what we're doing, when you talk about what we're doing with advertisers and our audiences, we have a concept where we're doing from a co-equity design standpoint, we're working with audiences, members of our community, but also advertisers to co-develop things together, right? Where we have more eyes on them from different perspectives, different intersectionalities that allows us to develop this as best we can with this free of bias. And so that's something that's happening right now that's very exciting.
Very exciting. So, so Komal, what does equitable AI look like for Google? And I know this is, right up your alley, so you can talk about that and tools and resources and how you're working with your clients and advertisers as well.
Yeah, so I think I want to huge plus one to what Judy said, that AI is evolving at such a breakneck speed, and we're having to evolve. I think firstly I want to acknowledge that all of this technology is still very nascent, right? It is still very much evolving. And we know, as you all know, large language models are trained on huge amounts of data. And with that training, if large language models can approximate human creativity and reasoning, they can also approximate human bias. So, large language models can be trained to generate CEOs to look like just white men. Or if you ask to generate nurses, you could get just women. One example of equitable AI that I can give is traditionally in the field of computer vision, ML models or machine learning models have actually failed people of color in the sense that these CV computer vision models don't even detect medium and dark skin toned people. So recently, Google had worked with Dr. Ellis Monk, who is a socio-technical researcher at Harvard, to develop what's called the Monk skin tone scale. It's a skin tone scale that is more inclusive of light, medium, dark skin tones, and it's more amenable for machine learning training. So we actually open sourced, firstly, the scale, and we built AI from ground up based on this new skin tone scale, such that it can detect people of all skin tones. So that's one way of being equitable, right? Another way of being equitable is, I spoke a lot about how we can use AI to detect someone's skin tone or someone's perceived gender expression. I think we have to be very careful about applying our AI principles of responsible innovation to know things like a person's skin tone does not equate race or ethnicity. A person's gender expression does not equate their gender identity, right? So how do we apply AI in a manner that's responsible, because it can be used both for good and for bad, but it's up to us on how we apply it responsibly. So putting our AI principles and ethical principles to use. And I think maybe one more thing that I'll mention is, and this is something that really excites me, we were talking about how do you look at stereotypes? And that's a field of research that goes beyond just like looking at a person's expression, and it's looking at different modalities from a technical perspective. You look at how a person uses language, how a person uses their facial expression, which is called affective computing, and then there's vision, right? So there's a lot of research happening on how do we do multimodal analysis, looking at language, audio, speech, vision, affect, to actually infer stereotypes, which machines can't really easily infer. So I'm hoping that companies and academics will come together and continue working more in this field, so we can evolve AI to even detect more nuanced stereotypes in media, in ads.
So Rebecca, we're talking about AI for good, and how is Getty wrapping their head around it? Is there a Getty AI collection? How are you protecting IP? How are you protecting your photographers? It's got to be a beehive.
Yeah, and I have to say it's dominating the conversation internally at the moment. But I think that there's two things about Getty Images. One, we have it's deep in our values that we are developing content that we feel good about, that is representing the world as it is, and that we can feel proud of into the future. We've also created our own AI gen model, and it's only trained on our content. So it's fully released. We have all the rights for the content that's in there. We haven't scraped anything from the web. We have amazing metadata. So some of the issues that we've been talking about is actually we can utilize that. And because we are supporting a community of 500,000 creators, we also want to ensure that if a client decides to create something on AI Gen, that those creators are compensated for that. So we've taken the same values that we use to create our stills and video into our AI Gen product as well. And we've developed that with NVIDIA, and NVIDIA have been a true partner and really believed in kind of the way forward with us. So we're focusing on the input to improve the output. And so, in terms of kind of diversity and inclusion, we're looking at less visible disabilities, because, one of the things about invisible disabilities is you can't out people. It's similar with the LGBT community. You can't out someone as a member of that community. You have to have a collaboration in that. So it's much more difficult. It's much harder to create content in this way. But these are the kind of this is the specificity that you have to get into in this work now. We saw a massive increase in representation of Black people across the world after what happened in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. But we haven't seen an increase in representation of people from South Asia. We see much more representation of Southeast Asia than we do South Asia. So we want to create more content to, again, just create more equity in terms of race and ethnicity. And then things like body shapes. Body shapes is like the 21st century conundrum. How do you describe body shapes? I would love somebody to come up with a scale, if you can have a word with your friend at Harvard. But in terms of body shapes, we have seen an increase in larger body shapes in terms of the content that's being used. But when you dig into it, they tend to be people exercising, or it's about health in some way. They're not leading businesses. They're not in friendship groups. You know, it's that, again, it's that specificity. I shouldn't keep saying that word because I can't actually say it. But it's that kind of, you know, it's that amount of detail that you have to go into in this work.
Well, it's interesting. I want to just respond to that and then have another big question for Bill. So with the Institute, you know, we do study those 6 dimensions, and body diversity is one of them. And 2 years ago, our PhDs came to us and said, we can't use body positivity. We can't use large body type. We have to say fat. And I'm like, okay. And the first time we said that at a symposium, one of our partners like gasped and almost like fell over. And I had our PhD write a white paper, but the community has embraced the word fat because fat does not have a medical connection, or fat is no different than I'm short, or you know, somebody else is tall. And so that's the word that they've used. And so now we've embraced it and have had to do a lot of education around that. But we're in service of the community, and it's, you know, very fluid, just like namely including mental health as a part of a disability, you know, umbrella. So, but Bill, you know, we were talking about collaboration and a lot of education, and you have also dedicated your life to training and nurturing the next generation. And now the next generation has to understand all this technology and this AI. And you have formed the National Millennial and Gen Z community. How are you teaching and training the next generation? And how do we give them these kind of North Stars, you know, as they're thinking about developing content or how they're going to lead as business people?
Yeah, Madeline, before I start, I did want to, just recognize some of the comments here. What is the beauty of this stage here is that we're all holding each other accountable. So the ad agencies, are fueled a lot by groups like Geena Davis Institute, who are criticizing us and saying, what are you doing? But we're also, collaborating with Meta, Google, and Getty Images to make sure that we have the things that we need in order to serve the companies that we have. So the more we have these kind of discussions, or we hold one another accountable, is how we change the way we look at the world and how we help our clients look at the world. But as for the National Millennial and Gen Z committee, one of the founders is in the audience, LJ. And our focus is trying to, first of all, civil discourse. We wanted to originally change the narrative around millennials. Everybody used to make fun of millennials, particularly the boomers and Gen Xers. And we wanted them to have a platform so that they can speak for themselves. But now that's evolved to civil discourse. How do we have civil discourse? How do we instill things like critical thinking? How do we have dialogue and focus more on listening to understand, and then ultimately, discussing the things that make us unique and cool? And so that's been the hallmark of the organization. And it's really reshaping the way we look at companies like Meta and Google and Getty Images and Starbucks and all the others, is that this group now gets together. And it, by the way, includes people that are far to the left and far to the right, recognizing that every individual that lives in the world has something to offer in terms of a solution to challenges and problems. And so when we get together, we focus on listening to understand, but also having really great dialogue and putting people in sometimes difficult positions so that they find a solution together. And that has grown exponentially, not only in the US, but also in other parts of the world.
Thank you so much for doing that. So I know we're almost out of time. We have time for maybe one or two questions. Does anyone have a question for our panelists? All right. Oh, well, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm short. Remember, I can't see anything. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Gentleman when he said that a lot of this diversity talk is so focused on the U.S. and it's just really important. Like I have multiple citizenships, including U.S. and Finland. It's really important that we really look specifically at regions, and because it's absolutely key. something that's really divisive in the US is not divisive in Nigeria, okay? Something that's really divisive in Japan is not divisive in, I mean, I don't know, in India. Like, we really need to include the globe, because even Lines is very US focused, which, I mean, I get it, which is fine. I mean, I'm also American, but like, it's like we gotta, but I'm also a Finnish national, so I have both citizenships, even though I don't look Finnish. But it's really important that we always think of like the world, like just because someone's American, think of the world. So I just would like to.
I am so happy you said that, because when we're having this conversation about AI, I was a little angry. And even in conversations, the company, Americans will say, not all Americans, but we're having a conversation of the world, and it's China and Finland and Africa. And it really upsets me when people say Africa like it's a country. There's over 50-something countries in Africa. So I think it's very important for all of us who are Americans, you're not American, sorry.
I'm representing the rest of the world here.
Yeah. That we remind ourselves that the world does not revolve around the United States of America. So thank you for saying that.
Well, yes, of course. Thank you. Just writing on that last question.
Absolutely.
Following up on that last question and the response that Bill has just given us, how do we achieve that diversity and inclusivity if the content is not being made in diverse and inclusive locations?
I can respond to. I mean, you can probably respond on a bigger scale, but I mean, I can respond to that in that we shoot in 100+ countries around the world, and all of the work that we do is taken country by country. So we have Jackie here. I'm going to highlight her there. She's responsible for Europe and the Middle East in the creative team at Getty Images, and we have teams in each region who are looking at the specific countries, and for exactly that reason. We can't always be looking at the US for creating the content, and that's one audience. There are much bigger audiences actually outside the US, and so we take a very much a global approach to the way we work. But I have to say, in defense of the US, I think the conversations are more nuanced and are louder than they are elsewhere at this moment in time.
I agree. I mean, to answer your question very succinctly, I mean, we're obviously an incredibly global company. We have creators and designers and engineers around the world developing these content with very nuanced regional approaches, right? That is necessary. That is the fabric of social media, right? It has to be authentic. It has to feel and have a human connection to where you are, right? I think, to your point, what we want to make sure as technology evolves, technology tends to evolve and adapt across the globe at different paces, right? And so we want to make sure, as we look at large language models, ours is open source as well, is that what we're feeding it is in a global aspect as well, which we're doing. It's top of mind. I mean, my entire, my team, our business marketing group is very global as well. And we found, to your point, topics of discussion around meta and AI and say youth safety or elections are different in LATAM versus where they are in APAC. And then we can get hyper different, right? Where we think of how agencies are very much like Japan is an agency-led country, right? And how that and we influence and interact with advertisers is different there than the way potentially we interact here in France. And so it's entirely top of mind, but we always have to remind, especially for these companies, we're a US-based company, that we need to make sure that we continue to have that global perspective. Yeah. Great point.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. So I want to thank Judy and Komal and Rebecca and Bill. And thank you all for giving us your time today. Thank you.